Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Jai Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Yamuna Tiravanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jai Mishnupad Paramahansa Parudikacharya Ashtotar to the Srimad Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON BBT Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Mishnupad Paramahansa Parudikacharya Ashtotar to the Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Srimad Bhagavad Gita Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. On this 15th day of November 2022 in San Diego, a reading from Srimad Bhagavad Gita as it is, translation and commentary by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And we are beginning chapter 9 today, the most confidential knowledge, page 373. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Idam Tute Guyatamam Pravakshyami Anasuyave Jnanam Vijnana Sahitam Yadgyatpa Mokshase Shubhat. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Idam Tute Guhyatamam Pravakshyam Yanasuyave Jnanam Vijnana Sahitam Yadgyatva Mokshase Shubhat. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Idam Tute Guhyatamam Pravakshyam Yanasuyave Jnanam Vijnana Sahitam Yadgyatva Mokshase Shubhat. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Idam Tute Guhyatamam Pravakshyam Yanasuyave Jnanam Vijnana Sahitam Yadgyatva Mokshase Shubhat. Ashok, please. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Idam Tute Guhyatamam Pravakshyam Yanasuyave Jnanam Vijnana Sahitam Yadgyatva Mokshase Shubhat. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Idam Tute Guhyatamam Pravakshyam Yanasuyave Jnanam Vijnana Sahitam Yadgyatva Mokshase Shubhat. Want to try? Not tonight. Please. The page is 373. 373. You want to try, Manoram? Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Idam Tute Guhyatamam Pravakshyam Anasuyave Jnanam Vijnana Sahitam Yadgyatva Mokshase Shubhat. Page 373. Could you move over here? This is the lady side. Yeah, just move it. You're right over there. Okay. Anyone online who wants to chant? Okay. I'll just read along synonyms. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, said, Idam, this, tu, but, te, unto you, Guhyatamam, the most confidential, Pravakshyami, I am speaking, Anasuyave, to the non-envious, Jnanam, knowledge, Vijnana, realized knowledge, Sahitam, with, yet, which, Gyatva, knowing, Mokshase, you will be released, a Shubhat, from this miserable material existence. Translation. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, My dear Arjun, because you are never envious of me, I shall impart to you this most confidential knowledge and realization, knowing which you shall be relieved of the miseries of material existence. Purport. As a devotee hears more and more about the Supreme Lord, he becomes enlightened. This hearing process is recommended in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Quote, the messages of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are full of potencies, and these potencies can be realized if topics regarding the Supreme Godhead are discussed amongst devotees. Close quote. This cannot be achieved by the association of mental speculators or academic scholars, for it is realized knowledge. Page 373. Oh, you have to leave. Oh, sorry. Okay. The devotees are constantly engaged in the Supreme Lord's service. The Lord understands the mentality and sincerity of a particular living entity who is engaged in Krishna consciousness, and gives him the intelligence to understand the science of Krishna in the association of devotees. Excuse me. Discussion of Krishna is very potent, and if a fortunate person has such association and tries to assimilate the knowledge, then he will surely make advancement towards spiritual realization. Lord Krishna, in order to encourage Arjuna to higher and higher elevation in his potent service, describes in this 9th chapter matters more confidential than any he has already disclosed. The very beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, the 1st chapter, is more or less an introduction to the rest of the book. And in the 2nd and 3rd chapters, the spiritual knowledge is described is called confidential. Topics discussed in the 7th and 8th chapters are specifically related to devotional service, and because they bring enlightenment in Krishna consciousness, they are called more confidential. But the matters which are described in the 9th chapter deal with unalloyed, pure devotion. Therefore, this is called the most confidential. One who is situated in the most confidential knowledge of Krishna is naturally transcendental. He therefore has no material pangs, although he is in the material world. In the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, it is said that although one who has a sincere desire to render loving service to the Supreme Lord is situated in the conditional state of material existence, he is to be considered liberated. Similarly, we shall find in the Bhagavad Gita, 10th chapter, that anyone who is engaged in that way is a liberated person. Now, this first verse has specific significance. The words idam jnanam, this knowledge, refer to pure devotional service, which consists of 9 different activities: hearing, chanting, remembering, serving, worshipping, praying, obeying, maintaining friendship, and surrendering everything. By the practice of these 9 elements of devotional service, one is elevated to spiritual consciousness, Krishna consciousness. When one's heart is thus cleared of material contamination, one can understand this science of Krishna. Simply to understand that the living entity is not material is not sufficient. That may be the beginning of spiritual realization, but one should recognize the difference between activities of the body and the spiritual activities of one who understands that he is not the body. In the 7th chapter, we have already discussed the opulent potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his different energies, the inferior and superior energies, and all this material manifestation. Now in chapter 9, the glories of the Lord will be delineated. The Sanskrit word anasuyave in this verse is also very significant. I think there's a little editorial change. Now in chapter 9, the glories of the Lord will be further delineated, because we've got some glories already in the 7th chapter. The Sanskrit word anasuyave in this verse is also very significant. Generally, the commentators, even if they are highly scholarly, are all envious of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Even the most erudite scholars write on Bhagavad Gita very inaccurately. Because they are envious of Krishna, their commentaries are useless. The commentaries given by devotees of the Lord are bona fide. No one can explain the Bhagavad Gita or give perfect knowledge of Krishna if he is envious. One who criticizes the character of Krishna without knowing him is a fool. So such commentaries should be very carefully avoided. For one who understands that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the pure and transcendental personality, these chapters will be very beneficial. Om jnana timarandasya jnanandana salakya chakshur unmilitam mena tasmai shri gurave namaha. I was born in the darkest of ignorance, but my spiritual master Srila Prabhupada opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer my humble obeisance to him and all members of Sri Parampara, the disciplic succession. Sorry. Okay. So, we are embarking on, well, honored guest tonight. Govardhan Prabhu. We're embarking on the 9th chapter. This 9th chapter is practically every verse is quotable. Prabhupada quotes it. It's very, very important. And we'll find after a few verses, actually the next verse, There's quite a long purport, and Prabhupada wrote that as a separate essay. And so you'll see it flows in a certain way, and it comes to a very nice conclusion. But here he's introducing the chapter, and he's saying this is Guhyatamam. Just like we have beautiful, more beautiful, and most beautiful. We have this hierarchy in English, we can say. So in Sanskrit you have Guhya, which is confidential, Guhyatara, more confidential, and Guhyatamam, which is most confidential. Meaning that it is understandable by those who are really serious and who have gotten some mercy from Krishna, who are somewhat along the way. This is already the 9th chapter, so if you've been through 8 chapters, you've studied, and you're trying to understand, then this 9th chapter will be very beneficial. So, now the first thing he says, because you are never envious of me. We've had this before. If you recall in the 4th chapter, when Krishna is describing how he spoke the Bhagavad Gita millions of years ago to the sun god. Imam vivastute yogam proktavanaham abhyam vivasvamanavepaha manarikvakabe bravi. This is the first verse of the 4th chapter. And so, right at the beginning he says, I spoke this original knowledge, the same knowledge in the Bhagavad Gita, to the sun god millions of years ago, Vivasvan. And Vivasvan spoke it to his son, Vaivasvata Manu, who is our Manu. We're in like the middle of the Vaivasvata Manvantara, which is the period, very, very long. And Vivasvan, or Vaivasvata Manu, spoke it to Ikshvaku, who was one of the main kings in the line, the sun god, in which Ramachandra appeared. And then in this way it came down. It comes down to Rajarshis. Rajarshis is a combination of 2 words, Raja, which means king, and Rishi, which means learned sage. So these are kings who are very learned. They're devotee kings, and we have like Yudhishthira and Parikshit and all the great kings we learn about. So, and in this way, evam parampara praptam imam rajarshya vidu sakalena hamahata yogo nashtak parantaba. In this way, the knowledge came down with this word parampara. It's a very important word. Parampara means the cyclic succession, the succession of gurus and disciples who in turn become gurus for their disciples who in turn become like this. So they hand it down. The example is given sometimes, Prabhupada would give of a mango tree. That's all the mangoes are ripe, right? So you want to harvest the ones, especially the ones at the top, which got most of the sun, they're most ripe. So you get a ladder or someone climbs up there, but he just doesn't throw them down because someone might miss them. They'll get destroyed. But you get a whole string of guys. You hand down carefully, down, and then you can put it nicely in the basket. So similarly, this knowledge is I wouldn't say it's fragile, but it needs to be understood by devotees and practiced by devotees and then taught by devotees. Especially in the Kali Yuga, you have so many charlatans who want to get some position in society. They may read Bhagavad Gita, and especially they come from India, and they get a position because they know some Sanskrit and so, but they're really not devotees. I was mentioning this yesterday, or was it this morning? No, yesterday I think, about this verse by, I think, Sanatana Goswami. Either he quotes it or he wrote it. It says, Avaishnavo mukodgirnam putam hadikatamitam shavananayvas kartavyam sarprotishtam yatapaya. Avaishnava mukodgirnam, from the mouth of an Avaishnav, a non-devotee, one should never hear Krishna Katha, which by nature is like nectar and very purifying, but when spoken by a non-devotee is harmful. It's not going to help you. It's going to send you astray. Just as milk, which is nice food, if a poisonous snake gets in there and eats a little bit, some of the poison is going to go into the milk, and you have to avoid that. So it looks and tastes the same, just like we can hear kirtan from non-devotees, but they're very good musicians, And we say, oh, that's very nice, but it's not helping you. It won't help you, because it's not uttered by a devotee. What matters is the heart. So then comes the verse I want to emphasize, because it's exactly related to this. So Krishna says then, this is the 3rd verse in the 4th chapter, Sahevayam maya teja yoga prokta puratana bhaktosi me sakacheti rahasyam yeterutamam. Rahasyam means a secret, confidential, guhyatamam. Same idea. Sahevayam, that same science of Bhagavad Gita, I'm now speaking to you, Arjun. Why? Because you're my devotee and my friend. The devotees can understand and then pass it on nicely. So this is the disciplic succession. So now Krishna is saying, reiterating that, and he's speaking this most confidential to Arjuna because he's anusuyave, because he's not envious of him. Jnanam vijnana sahitam. So jnana, we can all get jnana. Anyone can read the Bhagavad Gita and get some knowledge there about the soul and about Krishna, you know. But then there's vijnana. It's the difference between hearing about, you know, a wonderful kind of honey, which is a mixture of different kind of pollens that bees come, you know, and you can get it in sprouts. And I'm telling you, oh, it's really delicious, you know, you should try it. So now you have knowledge of that honey. But until you go to Sprouts and get it and offer it to Krishna and taste it, you don't have vijnana. Vijnana is direct experience. So jnana precedes vijnana, because by that knowledge you know, I know that I'm a soul, but I haven't really seen the soul, you know. I know that Krishna is real, but I haven't really seen Krishna in his original form. But I want to, and therefore I'm willing to do steps A, B, C, D, and E for purification so that Krishna will reveal. The whole point here is that the knowledge of Krishna and all of these mysterious subjects are understood deeply by revelation. You cannot, Krishna reserves the right of not being visible to the average person. Naham prakasha sarvasya yoga maya samavita. I'm not manifest to all, I'm covered by my maya potency. Like people may come in here, wander in, you know, what's this all about? And they see the deities, and they can't understand the deities. They think, well, we're worshipping statues here. We're just worshipping idols, you know. They don't understand. But we know, because of the way in which they were installed and they're worshipped, that really we can experience Krishna's presence through there. Krishna is present everywhere. He's present in all of these earth, water, fire, the stone, the brass, the marble, whatever it is. So he can, if he wishes, to manifest himself through the stone, and especially through sound. This is our real access. Temple or no temple, we can always chant Hare Krishna and associate with Krishna, provided we're chanting sincerely and purely, trying to interfere with it, and we've received the mantra in disciplic succession. So this is a nice introduction here. And what's the benefit? There's a benefit. Yagyadva, those who understand, moksha se ashubhat. They become liberated from all inauspicious things. In other words, you get liberated from birth, old age, disease, and death, and go back to Godhead. The very end of this chapter, there's a verse that's one of the two central verses in the whole Bhagavad Gita. I'm not going to say what it is now. Some suspense, you know. Okay, any questions on this first purport? Yes, go ahead. We'll get the mic because there's people online.
Thank you, Hare Krishna. So, I understand the most confidential, but every time I remember reading this, what is the difference between confidential and more confidential? The superlative, the previous of
this.
Well,
I think Prabhupada mentions that what's confidential is knowledge of the soul.
Okay.
Just understanding we're not the body, that we're pure spirit, that we live forever, that we're never born. That's confidential knowledge. Not everyone understands it. Even if they hear about it, they generally don't believe it, you know, because it's beyond your experience. So that's the first step. We learned that in the second chapter when Krishna started speaking, right? So that's confidential. More confidential can be that there is a supreme spirit and we're his eternal servants. You know, that's more confidential. But the knowledge of the details of Krishna's pastimes in Goloka Vrindavan, you know, Prabhupada quotes in several purports here, the Brahma Samhita. This is more confidential, the details. In other words, it's fairly logical to come to the conclusion, if you're a little bit sane, that there's a supreme intelligence behind everything. Because otherwise, how does all of this organization come out? This is the argument from design. Prabhupada uses it all the time, that there's a God. So that's confidential knowledge. But the details of how God is great, Prabhupada said it's good to know that God is great. But how God is great, and how he's working in the material world and in the spiritual world, that's most confidential. So more confidential is that there's a God and we have a relationship. Confidential is your spirit, you're not matter. That's the kind of level that you go.
How is this related to the Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagwan?
Yeah, well, that's a little different in that even aspiring to understand Brahman is quite advanced. You know, for someone to be like the, in the sense that you're dealing with the absolute truth. You know, whether it's Brahman, Paramatma, or Bhagavan. But Brahman realization, as we learn very distinctly, is not really fulfilling for the soul. And in our line, it's hellish. It's like hell. Why? Because for devotees, the real treasure is not even liberation, but it's being situated in devotion, loving devotional service to Krishna forever, constantly, no break. That's the goal of the whole thing. So that can be done anywhere. That can be here in the material world. And so we have these verses like where the demigods are praying for Krishna in the womb. The famous verse, Ye nye aravind bhaksiva muktamaninas tvayastabhava davishuddha buddhaya aduha kutshena param param tata patanchadona nadu yusharangvaya. Haribo, Bhushan. Welcome. That besides your devotees, there are other transcendentalists whose intelligence is not that pure, abhishuddha buddhiya, and therefore they aspire to rise up to the Brahman platform, the impersonal realization. Aruha kuchena param padam means by severe austerities. I always like to give this example because we're also aspiring transcendentalists. We want to transcend the three modes of material nature, and we want to experience the, pure goodness and Vasudeva state and all that. But these aspirants, or these transcendentalists, they don't believe in the supremacy of the personality of Godhead. If they believe in Krishna, they think that he's a manifestation of Brahman. You see? That the ultimate thing is Brahman. This is especially Mayavadis. So, how to transcend the pullings and pushings of the mind and senses and all of these different things without all this help, without the holy name, without the prasadam, without the deities, without the devotees, without the temples, just with your force of your mind, you know, to try to... Can you imagine how difficult that would be? I can't talk... Well, this verse says it's possible for a few to, by force of will, to come to the platform of Brahman. That's called param padam. But eventually they come down. Patantyadho means literally falling down. You can't stay there because it's not natural. Anadrita yushmarangriya, because they have no sense of wanting to worship the lotus feet of the Lord. We are persons. We're, what was that old say? Chips off the old block or something? Yeah. In other words, we're Anksha of Krishna. He's the Supreme Person. He has personality, activity, senses, form, everything. And so that's why we do have those things. And because he's you know, what's going on in Goloka Vrindavan? All kinds of lila, loving pastimes. He's not just sitting there meditating, you know, it's activity. So that's the reality. That's the ultimate goal. But there is something called the Paramatma manifestation, and there is something called the Brahma Jyoti, which is where there's no birth, old age, disease, and death. There's simply pure existence, pure consciousness. So what's attractive for the personalists of that is that, oh, thank God, no more birth and death, no more old age, no more disease. I can just kick back here forever. You know, I've made it. But you haven't made it, because you still have consciousness, you still have desire, you still want to love and be loved. You're not in your real relation with God. And so they come down. They come down because there's relationship here. I mean, it's material, but at least there's something, you know. So that's not going to cut it. And for the yogis, the Paramatma realization, that's better. There's some personal conception there. But the variety of relationship isn't there. If you have anything, it's Shantaras, where you're very peaceful, you're simply happy thinking of Vishnu. But what generally happens with the yogis is that if they're really serious, they achieve some siddhis, some powers. Can you imagine him walk on water, grab anything you want, control people's minds? These are all powers. They're not necessarily virtuous or anything, but they're powers. So they can take away your mind. They can be something you're very proud of. We have so many examples of these proud yogis. Durvasa Muni, who was trying to one-up Ambarish Maharaj, who was a king, which is a lower social stage than the great yogis and sages. But he was a wonderful devotee. Savai Mana Krishna, but he put his mind on the lotus feet of Krishna. Whatever he spoke was about Krishna. His hands he used to clean the temple. His feet he used to walk to the... In other words, he had engaged everything, So Durvasa Muni challenged him. He tried to one-up. I'm not going to go into the whole story. But, this is what happens. You get so proud of your powers that you go overboard, just like Indra. He's trying to inundate all of Vrindavan just because he didn't get his yajna. If he had succeeded, they were all drowned. And then he said, "Oh no, what have I done?" So Krishna defeated him, with one hand. But again, he had to offer his prayers. And then later on, again, he challenges Krishna. This is the problem when you're so materially powerful that it easily goes to your head. So anyway, Durvasa was defeated, and the yogic process, which he can realize the super soul, but these other aspects are there, and it's not going to take you to Goloka Vrindavan, just the meditative thing. And there's a wonderful verse, because we're in the line of Lord Chaitanya, so there's a wonderful book called the Chaitanya Chandramrita, which is, I think, 135 verses about Lord Chaitanya. I recorded it many, many years ago. So one of the verses probably would always quote, you've heard this one, Kaivalyam Nadakayate, Chidachapura Kasha Pushpayate, Durdan Dendra Yakada Sarpa Patalit Prodkata Dangschayate. So the first thing it says, Kaivalya, merging into the Brahman, which is the goal of the Maya bodies and the Brahma bodies, so freedom. Oh God, no more birth, old age, disease, and death. It's liberation. Yes, that's good. But what is it for? That I don't know. That's my goal, just liberation. No, So for a devotee, it's hell. Why? Kaivalyam means liberation in the oneness, and Nadakayate means like hellish, because there's no possibility of any bhakti there. For bhakti, you need Bhagavan, Krishna, the Bhakta, and the process of Bhagavan. If you've merged into the Absolute, there's no Bhagavan, there's no bhakti, there's no Bhakta even. So that's like hell. And then what else do people strive for? He goes through the whole list. The heavenly planets. Tridashapur, means 30 or 30 million of them, there's all these heavenly planets you can aspire to. For a devotee, it's like a sky flower, meaning that it's unreal. Who cares? It doesn't even exist. And then there's the yogic cities, Durandendriyakala Sarpapatali. So one of the main things the yogis are after is controlling the senses. That's the big thing. But for the devotees, he said, we have the same senses, but they're like, and the senses, they can bite you. If you don't have a process, a sense of, your eyes will drag you away here, your tongue will drag you away there. So they're compared to poisonous snakes. So we still have the senses as devotees, but they have their fangs removed. They can't bite you, because the senses are all engaged in Krishna's service. You're using them, they're paraphernalia for service, just like we have the worship paraphernalia. So that's for the senses become your friends. Oh, now I can walk to the temple, now I can sing, like I lost my voice, I want to, get it back. So therefore, that's what you surpass the yogis. The yogis, they go to the Himalayas, through force of will, control this, control that. No, they're dancing and chanting and going, and cooking and taking prasadam. And the senses, and you see Krishna, you hear about Krishna. If you do it right, all your senses can be controlled. So then, what's the last one? Oh yeah. So then there's the Prodkata Dangschayate, Vishwang Purna Sukhayate. So for the devotees, the whole universe, which can be so troublesome because it's so threatening, you don't have enough of this, you didn't do this, it's like full of happiness because you see Krishna's pastime going on everywhere, and everything you do is part of that lila. You're serving Krishna in everything you do. So you make through the world, and there's no, you can go through difficult periods, But it's not like, the world is basically a field of devotion, just like this temple. And then what about the demigods like Brahma and Shiva, Vidhi Mahindrasi? Says they're no more worshipable for a devotee. We respect them, we respect them. Shiva is the greatest Vaishnava, Brahma is the head of our Sampradaya. But we don't worship them for anything. So this is typical Prabodhananda Saraswati. They're no more significant than insects for us. Hare Krishna. But how does one come to this state? Vidhi Mahindra Kitayate Yat Karunya Kataksha Vaibhavatam Tam Gaurameva. I glorify this Gaura Chandra, this moon of Lord Chaitanya, golden moon. One who is empowered by the merciful sidelong glance of Lord Chaitanya can attain this state, can have all of this consciousness. So that's the line we come in. And we're not going to get that so much directly in the Bhagavad Gita, but this chapter is all very foundational knowledge. And especially this next verse is probably quoted almost, more than any other verse. All right, let's go on. Rajavidya Rajaguhyam Pavatram Idamuttamam Pratyakshabhagamam Dharmyam Susukam Kartamabhyam. This knowledge is the king of education, the most secret of all secrets. It is the purest knowledge, and because it gives direct perception of the self by realization, it is the perfection of religion. It is everlasting, and it is joyfully performed. Purport. Now this, as I pointed out, some of you weren't here, this purport was written as I think a separate article, maybe for the old BTG. So you can see it has a beginning, middle, end, and wonderful conclusion. This chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is called the King of Education because it is the essence of all doctrines and philosophies explained before. Among the principal philosophers in India are Gautama, Kanada, Kapila, Yagyavalkya, Shandilya, and Vaishvanara. And finally there is Vyasadeva, the author of the Vedanta Sutra. So there is no dearth of knowledge in the field of philosophy or transcendental knowledge. Now the Lord says that this 9th chapter is the king of all such knowledge, the essence of all knowledge that can be derived from the study of the Vedas and different kinds of philosophy. It is the most confidential because confidential or transcendental knowledge involves understanding the difference between the soul and the body, and the king of all confidential knowledge culminates in devotional service. Generally, people are not educated in this confidential knowledge. They are educated in external knowledge. As far as ordinary education is concerned, people are involved with so many departments: politics, sociology, physics, chemistry, mathematics, astronomy, engineering, etc. There are so many departments of knowledge all over the world, and many huge universities, but there is unfortunately no university or educational institution where the science of the spirit soul is instructed. Yet the soul is the most important part of the body. Without the presence of the soul, the body has no value. Still, people are placing great stress on the bodily necessities of life, not caring for the vital soul. The Bhagavad Gita, especially from the 2nd chapter on, stresses the importance of the soul. In the very beginning, the Lord says that this body is perishable and that the soul is not perishable. Andabandha hime deha nityasyokta sharirinaha. That is a confidential part of knowledge, simply knowing that the spirit soul is different from the body and that its nature is immutable, indestructible, and eternal. But that gives no positive information about the soul. Sometimes people are under the impression that the soul is different from the body, and that when the body is finished, or one is liberated from the body, the soul remains in a void and becomes impersonal. But actually, that is not the fact. How can the soul, which is so active within the body, be inactive after being liberated from the body? It is always active. If it is eternal, then it is eternally active, and its activities in the spiritual kingdom are the most confidential part of spiritual knowledge. These activities of the spirit soul are therefore indicated here as constituting the king of all knowledge, the most confidential part of all knowledge. This knowledge is the purest form of all activities as explained in the Vedic literature. In the Padma Puran, man's sinful activities have been analyzed and are shown to be the results of sin after sin. Those who are engaged in fruitive activities are entangled in different stages and forms of sinful reactions. For instance, when the seed of a particular tree is sown, the tree does not appear immediately to grow. It takes some time. If it is first a small sprouting plant, then it assumes the form of a tree, then it flowers and bears fruit, and when it is complete, the flowers and fruits are enjoyed by persons who have sown the seed of the tree. Similarly, a man performs a sinful act, and like a seed, it takes time to fructify. There are different stages. The sinful action may have already stopped within the individual, but the results or the fruit of that sinful action are still to be enjoyed or experienced. There are sins which are still in the form of a seed, and there are others which are already fructified and are giving us fruit, which we are experiencing as distress and pain. These little editings have been done. As explained in the 28th verse of the 7th chapter, a person who has completely ended the reactions of all sinful activities and who is fully engaged in pious activities, being freed from the duality of this material world, becomes engaged in devotional service to the Supreme Lord, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. In other words, those who are actually engaged in the devotional service of the Supreme Lord are already freed from all reactions. This statement is confirmed in the Padma Purana. Aparabdha palam papam kutam bijam palonmukam kramenaiva paliyeta Vishnu bhakti vatatmanam. For those who are engaged in the devotional service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, all sinful reactions, whether fructified in the stock or in the form of a seed, gradually vanish. Therefore, the purifying potency of devotional service is very strong, and it is called Pavitram Uttamam, the purest. That's in the verse. Pavitram idam uttamam. Uttama means transcendental. Tamas means the material world or darkness, and uttama means that which is transcendental to material activities. Devotional activities are never to be considered material, although sometimes it appears that devotees are engaged just like ordinary men. One who can see and is familiar with devotional service will know that they are not material activities. They are all spiritual and devotional, uncontaminated by the material modes of nature. It is said that the execution of devotional service is so perfect that one can perceive the results directly. This direct result is actually perceived. This is pratyakshavagama. That's what he's glossing now. This direct result is actually perceived, and we have practically experienced that any person who is chanting the holy names of Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, in course of chanting without offenses, feels some transcendental pleasure, and very quickly becomes purified of all material contaminations. This is actually seen. Furthermore, if one engages not only in hearing, but in trying to broadcast the message of devotional activities as well, or if he engages himself in helping the missionary activities of Krishna consciousness, he gradually feels spiritual progress. This advancement in spiritual life does not depend on any kind of previous education or qualification. The method itself is so pure that by simply engaging in it, one becomes pure. So I'm going to stop there because it's a long purport. And how can we tell if we're making advancement? Prabhupada here is saying if you chant, of course of chanting without offense, you feel some transcendental pleasure. So what's the criterion for understanding if you're making advancement? Do you have to ask someone, am I advanced? No. You can tell yourself.
You naturally start involving more with the devotees. You like prasad more than any other food. You like chanting, you get addicted to it, and you prefer this other than other songs which are market.
Yeah.
So you try to do everything which is related to Krishna consciousness. That's when you know.
When yes, that's generally that's half of it. You become more attracted to everything related to Krishna. In other words, all the regular activities that you can encounter here in the temple, the chanting, the dancing, the deities, the books, the classes, everything, have festivals, they become more attractive to you than the million other things you could be attracted to out there. And that's the other side of it. You become unattracted to so many things that you may have done before. Yeah.
And I would also say that you live outside the temple, right? The activities that you do, you somehow transform them to service for Krishna.
Yeah, that's another thing, because you don't want to be out of devotional service, so you find a way of extending that even in ordinary activities. But the basic thing is, the simple thing is, you're becoming more attracted to Krishna and activities related to Krishna by devotional service, and less attracted to Maya, the things that we used to take pleasure in. You're not attracted anymore. It's called vairagya. Yeah.
Well, I had a question. I was curious, like, how do you know if you're doing it right? Like, on the other page, it was like, that when you're talking about it, maybe you're not, it's not like pure as honey, and because they're saying, like, they're envious of Krishna, like, why is that? But here it says then, they're broadcasting the message, and you gradually feel spiritual. So how do you know when you're doing it wrong?
Yeah, well, this is the essential importance of association. In other words, remember we started by talking about the parampara, that there's a succession of devotees, pure devotees, Srila Prabhupada is it, who are acharya. This word acharya is very important. Acharya means someone, there's a criteria for that. Someone who knows the Shastra, the scripture, like all the Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, knows the Shastra, speaking of devotional Shastra, who lives it, who is also following perfectly, and who takes the trouble to teach. So that word acharya comes from the word achar in Sanskrit, which means behavior. So, in other words, you observe someone and says, oh, this person is very peaceful, they're very, everything they do is involved with devotional service, I can learn from this person, I can emulate them, you see. They seem to be at a certain level, And this is just devotees in general, what to speak of, great devotees like Srila Prabhupada and his leading disciples, So that's how you can tell. In other words, you can say, someone who says, oh, you should chant like this, the japa. And you leave this one hand out, so you learn how to do it right. And there's reasons for it. You may not know all the reasons why. This morning, I think Maharaj was talking about this finger. It represents the ego. We try not to touch the beads with this finger. We know when we're chanting. This is, yeah. So if someone says, oh, what's your name? Natalie. Natalie, you should chant like this. So now I know I'm doing it right.
Not with your fingers?
Well, generally not with both fingers. Once you get a bead bag, we'll set you up with a bead bag, and then the counting beads, and then you'll see the devotees are chanting that way. Don't get me wrong. Don't stop chanting. Keep chanting, even if you're chanting wrong. But if you want to know if you're doing it right, that was your question, by the association of more experienced devotees, who themselves have been taught. That's not good. There's a little parampara may come down. I learned from the temple president.
This nerve directly goes to your brain. So, where you also train your brain nerve to be more concentrated.
That I never heard of, but anyway, it could be true. All right, so let's see, we stopped here. One can perceive the results directly. That's just what I was talking about. And especially for us, in this line, it's really measured most obviously in your attraction for chanting, attraction to the holy name. When you first come, if you've never chanted, it can be a real austerity. If you want to live in a temple, you got to chant 16 rounds. All right, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. I'm not imitating anyone, Hare Krishna. And so it's difficult getting up early. It's like a major, I tell this story, it's funny, some people haven't heard it. So I was once a very new bhakta. I moved in, and I'm coming up on my 50th anniversary of moving in, March 27th, 2023. I joined in 73. So I was ready. I'm not going to tell all the things. See, I wasn't so young. I was 25 years old when I moved in. A lot of guys were 18 and 17, like Madhya Ryan, he was 17 years old. I wasn't that fortunate. But getting up is like a major thing at that hour, right? Because you're not used to it, And then not only getting up, But in my day, taking a cold shower, March in New York, March is not a spring month, it was cold, it was still winter, just beginning of spring. So anyway, there I'm standing in line in the shower. We had, a couple of showers and a bunch of guys, so we had to stand in line, All right, I'm getting ready. So, and everyone, they're discreet. It's all cold, there's no hot water, it's all cold water. 3:30 in the morning. And then finally, my turn's coming. Okay, am I going to be able to stay in the ashram or not? Because you have to get up and you have to take a shower to go, to live. So, I had been practicing yoga, and I would practice some pranayama. And there's a certain heating breath. Have you ever tried it? It's basically breathing as fast as you can, and it really works. I'm still doing it. So when my turn came, I said, all right, I got this covered, So I went in there, turned on the cold water, freezing cold water, 16 seconds or so, like the 16-second shower. I was done, I was out, I got it made, I'm going to be a yogi. So these are the kind of steps you go, but you have all the peer pressure, and the peer, support too. So that the ashram, the association, this is how you learn, the basics. And so, and Prabhupada set it up, heroically, to start from scratch. Nobody knew anything, chanting and giving out prasadam, speaking, and people were coming, and it worked. And we heard this recently. One of his dearest godbrothers was Kinchana Krishnadas Babaji. And from when he joined the ashram, he was a young man, and he was just chanting. He just wanted to chant. He chanted all day and into the night. And the other devotees who had all these duties to perform, they complained. They complained to Bhaktisivana Saraswati Thakur. He's not doing his duties. He's not washing the pots. He's not, he's just chanting. So Bhakti says, okay, if you can chant through the day and into the night like he is, then you can do like that. They went back to the pots. Because, getting through 16 rounds, So he was wonderful. I had a great opportunity to meet him, and some devotees had more association. But in 1977, this was the year Prabhupada disappeared. In fact, the solar anniversary was yesterday, November 14th. But we follow the lunar calendar, so it was late October this year. So anyway, this is an interesting story. So I was sitting in L.A. working with Satsvarup Maharaj on the Back to Godhead magazine. He was the editor-in-chief, and I was one of the editors, but he was like GBC and everything. So Prabhupada was in Vrindavan, and we'd get telegrams or calls. Oh, Prabhupada had this health crisis. He would fly off, to be with Prabhupada when he disappeared, but he didn't disappear. He came back. It happened several times, going and coming. Then we heard that Prabhupada wanted as many devotees as possible to come and join him there. Actually, what it said is that all my devotees should come, but the GBC couldn't figure out how the temple was going on. So, anyway, so I tried to get, I didn't have any money, but I had asked my authorities if I could get a flight to India, be with Prabhupada. I said yes, but first you have to do this and this. I was writing the captions. Have you ever seen that book, The Science of Self-Realization? That book was the last book that was sent to the printer while Prabhupada was on the planet, and they were racing to get it done. And I was the devotee who wrote the captions to the paintings, So I had to, wait to do that. So myself and my friend, my co-worker on the BTG, his name was Mandaleshwar, who was a wonderful editor. He was largely responsible for shaping and forming that Prabhupada Lilamrita to be what it is. He did a lot of work on that. So we were going together, and we took off, I don't know, maybe on the 11th day of November. No one knew when Prabhupada was going to... And it was Krishna's arrangement. There was a bomb scare on the plane. We were heading toward Heathrow from LA, all across the country, and then, to UK. So they didn't tell us, they could freak everybody out on the plane. There was a bomb on the plane. You can imagine what that would... So, but we didn't land in Heathrow. We landed in Shannon Airport in Ireland. They wanted to inspect that plane, naturally. Maybe there is a bomb, so it took them 24 hours to look every inch of that plane. So we missed our connections. So we were late in getting to Bombay. We got there, I don't know, the 15th or the 16th And we got a telegram, one devotee couldn't even speak from Bombay, and then Prabhupada had left the planet. So anyway, you know, it was heartrending. So we made our way to Vrindavan. There was a big festival there, disappearance, it was a whole thing. And then we went to Mayapur because there's something called a Pushpa Samadhi. Samadhi is a place where the pure devotees are interred. Most devotees who aren't sannyasis, their bodies are burned. The bodies are burned, you know, and because you're not the body, and that's standard. But pure devotees, the bodies aren't burned because their bodies are understood to be completely spiritual. So Prabhupada's actual body was interred there in Vrindavan, but they do a pushpa samadhi. Pushpa means flowers, and the flower garland that he's wearing, you know, at the time, those are taken to, at this time, Mayapur, and those are buried, and then they build a big samadhi. And any of you been to Mayapur, there's a spectacular big samadhi that was erected on that. So I went down there to that, and I had an assignment from BTG. And we had heard that Sridhar Maharaj, one of Prabhupada's dearest godbrothers, had proof that Prabhupada was a Shaktivesha avatar. Well, this is newsworthy. Don't forget, I'm working for BTG. I'm a cub reporter. So as soon as we had that pushpa, I went across the river and I visited Sridhar Maharaj's ashram, which was in Navadvip. And miraculously, Kinshana Krishna's Babaji was there because he had been up with Prabhupada practically to the last day. And he didn't use any kind of transportation. He was a Babaji, means he walks everywhere. So there's no way he walked from Vrindavan to Mayapur in 2 days, you know. But he had some mystic powers. I heard that he could, you know, get into the Yamuna, and Yamuna connects to the Ganges, and come out of the Ganges in Mayapur like in 1 day or 1 hour. So somehow he was there. So he answered the door when I knocked on the gate, and he opened the door. And I told him what my mission was, that I need to see Sridhar Maharaj and ask him a question about this proof that Prabhupada is a Shaktivesh avatar. Shaktivesh means invested with potency of Krishna. Very, very wonderful, rare. But as you know, I joined in 73, this was 77, so it was just a few years. And I was not, you know, I didn't really observe the etiquette perfectly, so I asked Babaji Maharaj, would you like to hear a nice shloka? Even today, that's what I like to do. So he laughed and he said, yeah. So I chanted something from Krishna Karnamrita, and he laughed. He said, oh, just see, Babaji, Swami Maharaj, he called Prabhupada Swami. Swami Maharaj has the Mlechas and Yavanas chanting the Krishna Karnamrita. So he told me to learn all the verses, which I still haven't done yet. I know maybe 20, 30 of them. So anyway, he took me up to Sridhar Maharaj, and I offered Dandavats, and I explained my mission. They said, oh, so Babaji Maharaj, get me the Chaitanya Charitamrita. This is a Bengali version that was printed by Gaudiya Math, you know, which Prabhupada used in his translation. And there's a verse in there that says something like, Kali Yuga, Krishna Sankirtan Yuga Dharma, Krishna Shakti Vina Nahaitar Pravartana. Meaning that in this Kali Yuga, the practice, the Yuga Dharma is Sankirtan, congregational chanting of the holy name of Krishna. And unless one is Krishna Shakti Vina, without Krishna Shakti, without his energy, one cannot spread that chanting all over the world. Prabhupada spread the chanting all over the world. Therefore, he must have Krishna Shakti. There's the Shaktivesh. This was his proof, you know. So I stayed there another day or so. Then I went to Bombay and did some interviews with Giriraj Swami about the imminent opening. So that was my interaction with him. But he left some wonderful kirtan tapes and everything, and he enlivened so many devotees. And when Prabhupada met him in Vrindavan, he came to visit there, and this was when Prabhupada first went back to Vrindavan in 1968 or 67. They were overjoyed to see each other. You know, he was very beloved. He would just chant. He always chanted and laughed, and he was very supportive of Prabhupada, how Prabhupada had, you know, so wonderfully. And he said, why did Prabhupada succeed? Why could he succeed when none of his godbrothers even tried, basically? Because he had absolute faith in the chanting of the holy name, the power of the holy name. And that's why when he came, that's basically what he did. He chanted, and got interest, and he was able to instill the seed of faith, the bhakti lata bija, the seed of the creeper of devotion, which if watered nicely by hearing and chanting, grows nicely, you avoid the offenses, and it fructifies into the fruit. What's the fruit? Pure love of God, the fruit of prema. That's what the ultimate is. Uh-oh. All glory to Srila Prabhupada. Hari Hari. Sorry.